Hello lovely people, my name is Wizo from Level Up Corner, and today we are going to be talking about pacing. Now, in your Dungeons & Dragons game, there are three subcategories of pacing. The first and most common type of pacing that people think of is your combat or encounter pacing. How will my players be able to get through these combats or encounters in a reasonable amount of time? It's supposed to take them an hour, but it's taking them an hour and a half, possibly 2 hours. Ugh. Those can completely destroy your session pacing. Your session pacing is trying to pace the session so that you are able to finish the game at the proper time. No one wants to end their game in the middle of a combat because we just ran out of time and we have to end it now. No one wants that. So session pacing is crucial so that your game is something special to your players. It's not something that they need to constantly be thinking, oh, alright, are we going to do anything today? And you need to get them more invested. Because if you keep breaking your session pacing, your players' immersion is just going to break and they're just not going to be as invested. And when your players are not as invested in your game overall, it will affect your campaign pacing. Now, campaign pacing is also very important because if you do not plan your campaign properly, you might not get through it. And we've all watched shows that have a great plot going, it's a wonderful show, and then the season's cut off and they don't actually finish it. We're left hanging forever. We never know what's going to happen, and that is far worse than the show finishing. So when you plan your campaign, you will need to try to make it so that you have reasonable expectations. If you end up planning your campaign and you plan to get them from level 1 to 20 in 2 years and you play once every month, probably not going to happen. Just saying. But today we are going to cover session pacing in particular. If you want to learn more about combat pacing, session pacing, or even campaign pacing, we have an article at levelupcorner.com in the description below that will help you in all three of those areas. But today we are going to cover, in particular, session pacing. Now, when you pace your sessions, there is a major problem that happens all the time, and that is player discussion. If your players end up discussing things, they can spend upwards of 30 minutes possibly discussing how to get through a door. Now, I'm not talking about them trying to figure out how to get through the door. I'm saying that players will have a discussion of, hey, should we do this, should we do that? And it can take 30 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, a long time potentially. And when you only have an hour and a half left and there's a combat in the next room, you might want to try to get your players to get in there. And when you need to get your players' attention in order to get them to stop discussing, you can cause one of two things. You can cause either an immediate threat to create a sense of urgency. You can say that the door opens and then goblins come at you, or you hear a sound in the back of the hallway that you just came from, whatever else. You're trying to give the players a sense of urgency so that they act and make sure that your game keeps pace. The second way of quelling player discussions, when need be, is that you can ask them, hey, what are you guys doing? And then try to get them to keep going. And this will give them a sense of urgency out of game rather than in game. If this is done, then your players will have the same results as if they had an in-game threat as well. Now, I'm not saying don't let your players discuss things. I'm saying there's a time and place for it. And if your players need to discuss something, well, you should probably try to make it so that your players have the proper time to do so, or that time is allotted for them to do so. Nothing is worse than causing a player discussion when you really can't afford it. Otherwise, your session will end up in a terrible state. Now, this also leads to the next problem of keeping your players' attention. Sometimes players' attention wander as they just start talking, as they just start fidgeting with the little character, or they could just have the classic be on their phones. If your players have problems keeping attention, do the two things we just talked about. Create a sense of urgency in game, or create a sense of urgency outside of game. Make it so that your players are more immersed, so that they need to be more focused, and that's that they can't just be relaxed and just not care about the game. You need to make sure that your players keep attention. And if your players keep attention, they will get through the session. They will get through whatever they want to do. Not necessarily what you want to do, because they're players. They're insane. You never know what players do. And that leads to the next section of preparation. You think that, oh, I've prepared this campaign session for them, and they're probably not going to get through it. I mean, they twiddled around on their thumbs last time. For the last two sessions, they really haven't done anything. I mean, they're probably not going to do anything. Well, the truth is that you will always be wrong in your preparation. And it is better to always over-prepare than under-prepare. The reason for this is that if you over-prepare, worst thing that happens, your players decide, hey, we're going to get through a lot of material today. Okay, cool. You don't need to make up things on the spot or try to adjust in order to get your players entertained. No, the problem is when you under-prepare. You see, if you under-prepare, your players have this magical ability to somehow decide, you know what, the Dungeon Master hasn't prepared enough today. So since he hasn't prepared enough, well, we need to speed through everything. And when this happens, you will start to panic. Understandably, you don't have everything done. You're trying to scramble to get more content for your players, to keep them engaged. And when you do this, you're not paying attention to the pacing of your game. When you don't pay attention to the pacing of your game, you will not end at an appropriate spot, or it'll be, at best, underwhelming. And we don't want to underwhelm the players. We want them to be excited to come back to the game. We want them to have excitement throughout the game, with a little calm usually to start, possibly some highs, get to some mediums, get to some high again at the end. Try to get a climax or something so that your players will want to talk about their experience outside of game, and get those player discussions to happen after session in real life, because players really do like to discuss a great game. But there's a problem. You need to immerse these players while you have your session. And the way that we usually, as Dungeon Masters, immerse our players is through narrative descriptions. We can tell them that they go into an ornate room that has a lavish cabinet and a bookshelf with every book that they could think of. You can go into all these descriptors, but descriptors can sort of destroy the pacing of a session. Generally, Dungeon Masters try to get better at descriptors. And if you want to get better at descriptors, we also have an article on that linked below. But after you get better at descriptors, you decide that, hey, I'm going to describe things very well, and descriptors are used to convey a message only. The problem is when we start to go overboard. We start to give the players too many options. We start to say that, hey, this is all what's in a room, and you describe every little nook and cranny in detail. The players will possibly get more interested, and they will try to go through 1,000 different checks, discuss, hey, is that crack actually a golden crack, or some ridiculous player discussions that could happen through your descriptions. You can also describe too little. If you just say that, oh, it's a bare room, you see a bare room, the players will instantly think that there's something up. They'll search every inch of that room for secret doors. They'll do anything that's counterintuitive, and any time that you try to convey the message that, this room's not very important, the players will think it's extraordinarily important and start to eat up all of your session time. Now, you don't want your players wasting time on these rooms when they're not going to get or find anything. That's just not very climactic, it's not very engaging for players, it's not good overall. So, what you need to do is make sure that your descriptors are not too much and not too little. It's a little bit of a Goldilocks zone, and you need to make sure that you just convey the message that this room, yeah, it's a bare room, it looked like that it was supposed to be this. Okay, once you tell them what it looked like it was supposed to be, then they probably won't search every inch of it. But if you just give them a bare descriptor and don't tell them what this room's supposed to be like, they want to find out what that room is supposed to be like. And in trying to find out what that room is supposed to be like, they will go through the 10,000 check process. This is where one person says, hey, this book, can I roll a history on it? Sure, you can roll a history on it. I rolled a 2. Next person comes along. Hey, that book that you were looking at, I think I might know something about it. Can I roll something on it? Okay, you can roll something on it. I rolled pretty low. Hey, next person comes along. Is that a... You get the idea. The party can go through 10,000 checks when they try to figure out every aspect of the room. And to save a lot of your time, you can just make it so that blanket statement, beginning of the campaign, session 0, whatever else, even if you need to readjust this rule so that since you've passed session 0 and your players don't have it yet, tell them at the beginning of your session, hey, from now on, if you enter a room, either A, you roll on something by yourself or the party, or B, you can roll with assist if someone else is assisting you. Otherwise, we're going to not have you roll because we'll just assume that the party has pooled their knowledge together and this is what you've come up with. It saves a lot of time. It makes it so that there's actually a chance of failure. Because if you have 4 or 5 people just rolling on, do I know anything about this? They'll probably get to know something about it. So make sure that you would try to limit the amount of checks that your players take. Otherwise, they'll eat up your session pacing. Now, why are we talking about session pacing so much? Why are we trying to end it? Well, I've alluded a little bit that you don't want your session to end up in a non-climactic fashion. You want your sessions to end up in a way so that your players will be able to either have player discussion afterwards or so that they will be excited to talk about it. And the best way to do this is to end your sessions in a sense of suspense or ponderance. Maybe it's a lull after a battle. You've just defeated combat. Now we break. Okay, now your players need to discuss what to do next because they were exhilarated from that combat. They're probably going to talk about it, and they're probably going to talk about it outside of game as well. If you leave them with a moral quandary, for example, you come across a room of orc babies, we'll pick up on there next time. Now they get to decide, what do we do with orc babies? How are we going to do this? Are we going to adopt them? Are we going to... And then they can go through all their ridiculous things if they do want to adopt them. Like, well, we should name this one Fred, we should name this one George, because players will discuss this in game and will just take forever doing so. If you end up in any of these instances, ending your session in a sense of quandary or climactic suspense, or just even a little lull after some heightened, exciting, and exhilarating moment, then your players will feel better about the session. They'll want to come back more, and they'll also slowly get more and more invested into your game, even if you don't really do anything else to make them more invested. Another important thing is that when you end your sessions, if you have the choice of ending it early or a bit late, always end it early. In fact, I would go as far as to say, plan your sessions to finish early. Because if your sessions are finished early, then when your players decide to have those discussions or they decide to do any of those strange and annoying things that we already talked about that will completely destroy the pacing of your session, you can allow it. You have some extra time. You can let them do whatever they want, and you can let them enjoy the game. And when you let them enjoy the game, it's more enjoyable for everyone else. That's kind of the idea of enjoyment. But anyways, when you try to make sure that your sessions are ended early, you're not going to have that long, drawn-out ending as well. You're not going to try to rush at the end in order to try to get your players out the door because it's time to go and everything. You, in ending your session early, will let them end on a high note, be able to discuss things, and people do like to get out a little bit early rather than a little bit late. Getting out late is a little bit stressful, and it will diminish the enjoyment that they had in their session if they end up leaving later and more stressed. It's always better to leave a little bit early. Let them have a little bit of extra time to converse. And in doing so, by pacing your sessions, you will be able to make it so that your group not only gets more immersed and has more enjoyment, but so that you will be able to make the world feel more alive and just make the game better overall. So, I hope that you enjoyed this video about pacing, and I hope that if you are interested about pacing your campaign and your combats, and you will be able to look in the description below, once again, to read more about that in the article. This has been Wizo, and keep rolling.